Hello, everyone. Today is Thursday, April 28th, and this is the Cluster API Provider Azure office hours. Cluster API Provider Azure is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. If you're joining us for the first time, or a reminder for everyone else, we're following the CNCF Code of Conduct. Please be respectful to everyone. And if you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand and I'll make sure that you're getting a chance to talk. Besides that, if you haven't already, please add your name to the attendee list. And if you have any topics or questions or anything you want to discuss, feel free to add it to the open discussion. Cool. That being said, let's get started. We usually just give a chance at the beginning for anyone who's new, who wants to say hi and introduce themselves, and just tell us, what brought them to the call. So if there's anyone here who hasn't been here before and wants to say hello and introduce themselves, now would be your chance. I will mute and I will let folks introduce themselves if they'd like. Okay. So it doesn't look like there's anyone new here who wants to say hi. So let's just keep going. All right, we've already done this. If you don't have access to the document, you can get access by joining the SIG Cluster Lifecycle mailing list that is listed here. And let's keep going and go into discussion. Mateusz, you have the first one. Go for it. I can't hear you. I don't know if it's just me.
Ditto. Yeah, you may be muted or.
Yeah, it doesn't look like you're muted, but your audio is not coming through.
It worked earlier.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, okay. I don't know. Zoom did something weird and just didn't process the audio. Anyway, hi. So hi everyone. And yeah, I wanted to ask. So we have Flutter templates PR open for a while now, and yeah, there have been questions to also include the CI for it, and we had to figure out how to provide like the Flutter images for this CI. And recently there was the community galleries got into the public preview, and it seems, according to my tests, that it requires some changes to the controllers for the machines. So you need to use the new like the community gallery specific API field to create the machines using the community images. And yeah, I just wanted to double check that this is something we can add to the CubZ, to the controllers. And it seems that it requires updating the compute SDK to the newer version. And yeah, so just wanted to check, and if maybe there is something I should keep in mind while working on this.
Yeah, thanks for updating us on that. I personally don't have any concerns. I think it's really good that we get to test out Flatcar with this and have a test, like an end-to-end test working. I would feel a lot more confident about merging the template than if it was just a reference that we don't know, if users are able to actually use it. I don't think there's any concern with updating the SDK particularly. Were there any other things that you were kind of not sure about wanting to check, or just the SDK part?
No, yeah, it's just the SDK part. So like there will be a new API field, I think, for the community image ID or something like this. And yeah, so it should be like pretty straightforward. Okay.
Yeah, makes sense. That should be good. Yeah. Feel free to update it in the PR or separately, whatever is easier.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions about the community galleries in Flatcar? Okay, not seeing any hands. Well, let's move on to the next topic. Jack, you had already started talking about this a little bit, but want to pitch again for the recording?
Yeah, sure. So I thought we might be better reminded to regularly update any interesting things we're seeing from our tests. We monitor a lot of tests, the CAPZ maintainers across the Kubernetes Azure ecosystem. And I think often what we're in the process of maintaining and updating and fixing and improving is worth sharing. So if we were to add that as a recurring topic to the template on top of the doc, every time we copy and paste, we would at least nudge ourselves to make a quick update. So do the ayes have it? Do the nays have it? Any concerns about that? Would it, I don't want to add bloat to the meeting, of course. And I also think that we should be free to pass over that and say no update if there aren't the folks present who are able to share any meaningful information. It shouldn't cause stress where we need to do more homework then. But on that note, I can add a few notes about the test signal. I've been tracking a few sort of low-level, infrequent, I guess, flakes. So I think overall test signal looks really good. It's significantly improved from, say, 3-6 months ago. So very, very happy. Thanks to everybody for maintaining that.
Thanks. Are there any specific flakes you want to call out, or any specific things that folks should watch out for in their PRs?
I don't think so right now. From what I'm seeing in PRs, PR signal is fairly friction-free. So if anybody else has any differing experiences, definitely please share. But
sounds good. Yeah, I think it's a really good idea to add an update maybe at the beginning or at the end of the meeting. I just don't want us to go back to what we were doing before, which was just opening the test grid link, looking at it and not really having any interpretation for what was going on. But I think, like you said, it makes sense to have, like, if there are updates, let's talk about those. But if there are no updates, then, you know, it's kind of works as a reminder to make sure we're watching the test signal and acting on it. So, yeah, great idea.
yeah, I think I agree with that 100%. Opening up and screen sharing a test grid link is a great way to scare everybody. Let's only do that if we have purpose in mind.
Yes. Sounds good. I do have one small test update, I guess. Stefan from CAPI had pointed out yesterday at the end of the day that there was an issue with the GitHub docs URL. So if we had those in some of our Markdown documents, it might cause issues with the Markdown link checker that we run as part of every PR. I don't know if anyone has seen that. I haven't had time to look at it, but that might be something we need to look into and apply the same workaround that they did in CAPI to make sure we don't run into that into PRs.
I have actually noticed that in my PR. So if that qualifies as test signal, that's definitely interesting. So FYI, folks are working through that, but you may see lint failures on your PRs.
Right.
I think the quickest way to fix that now is, because some work has been done late last week, is to rebase against main just to see if you don't have the fixes. That helped a PR of mine, like on Friday.
For CAPZ specifically, we haven't done the fix yet. So there's a specific fix to like for the docs.github.com URL, which is failing, and that there's a fix in CAPI, but we haven't merged. As far as I know, we haven't merged the fix in CAPZ.
So it's not like 100% reproducible.
It is. I think it started failing.
But we also had a different broken link on Friday that we fixed, right?
Okay.
I see. That
yes,
I was like,
not related to that. Yeah.
Yes.
Not that my anecdata should overweigh anything, but I seem to recall rebasing and.
Okay. Yeah. That was something different. I think that was an actual like link that disappeared in the Azure docs and had to be changed to a new link.
Got it.
Cool. All right. Any other updates on test signal? Any other thoughts or comments about how we should go about doing this? Is this useful to people? I saw a few thumbs up on video. Any objections, concerns? All right. Jack, how would you be able to add the topic to the template, please?
Will do. And I think adding it to the end of the meeting makes the most sense.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool.
All right, and you have the next topic as well. Go for it.
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly share, I think if you've been following this, the topic of out-of-tree cloud provider and CAPC, you will have observed that we are, as of a couple weeks ago, doing that validation with Helm. So we have updated the reference out-of-tree template to essentially exclude the cloud provider Azure bits. So if you just install that template as is, or use that template to install a workload cluster, then you'll notice that there's no cloud provider Azure runtime on your cluster. And that is by design. The idea is that you will deploy your cluster and then as a follow-up step, install the official cloud provider Azure Helm chart. And that has several advantages. The main one being that it will choose the right bits for your version of Kubernetes. And the secondary one, which is I think worth sharing in the update, is that Helm chart is moving forward with the regular releases in Cloud Provider Azure, which are, I suppose it's, I would estimate once or twice a month. Historically in CAPZ, we've sort of kept static references to various versions of the out-of-tree and then updated it every few months, just I guess when we think of it. So this maintaining the Helm chart makes it a no operation update. So essentially we passively in CAPZ update our out-of-tree tests as the Helm chart gets updated. So that may present problems in the future where we don't get test signal until after release, but I feel like overall the way that is tested in CAPZ in test grid should prevent that from happening very often. But that has advantages of letting us know right away when there is some kind of breakage in the affinity between CAPZ and Cloud Provider Azure. Is that all I wanted to share? Any questions on any of that? Cool. So yeah, main takeaway is that if you're using the reference template, do a quick refresh of the documentation, which has been updated, that clarifies that template will not deliver Cloud Provider Azure. You'll need to do a follow-up Helm command. And then the second main point is that we are going to be more rapidly testing the latest version of Cloud Provider Azure in CAPZ as a regular routine. I think that's it.
Thanks. Can I ask you also to talk a bit about what this means in terms of like other out-of-tree components like CSI drivers, and then what our plans are for making this the default?
Right. So let's step up a few thousand feet in elevation. So from a high level, Cloud Provider Azure was sort of a candidate to try this approach. First of all, that could be generalized across other components like CSI drivers, like Calico, potentially unlock more third-party integrations with CAPZ because this is a little bit easier than maintaining our own static cluster resource set, I would say. Like we spend a decent amount of energy just maintaining the Calico cluster resource set plus static spec. So I feel like the Cloud Provider Azure implementation of Helm has gone well, and we already have another contributor adding, I think it's for CSI file. Is that right, Cecile? I'm looking at the PR queue.
Ashutosh is working on that. He's in the meeting. Yeah.
Hi, Ashutosh.
We're starting with Azure file or Azure disk. I forget which one.
Yeah, I'm working on the CSI part. Just like got sidetracked with like one other activity. So I saw like one PR from Jack that is trying to generalize the Helm implementation. Yeah, I'll work on that and follow like what Jack did for Cloud Provider Azure. I think we should fall into the same pattern for CSI as well.
Yeah, cool. So the idea really is that the best case scenario will have a very lightweight way to integrate third-party components into specific end-to-end test scenarios. using Helm. So in the best case scenario, the third-party project itself maintains the sort of canonical Helm chart. That's not always true, and but because Helm is a fairly thin wrapper around basic Kubernetes resource specs, it shouldn't be too much work if we want to prioritize maintaining sort of CAPZ integration validation with things that don't have Helm charts. We can probably author our own under some sort of testing location to allow us to test those integrations. But yeah, this should unlock a lot of things that we don't currently have test coverage for. So that's exciting, and hopefully make it easier for users, which I think is the most important thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the update. Any questions for Jack? All right, no questions. Cool. Okay, Matt, you want to talk about the next meeting?
I don't actually have any ideas. I just wanted to put this on there to see if we could, because we wanted to do this ideally every time we had a meeting, although it's kind of a high bar to set. But if anybody has something they could present for the next meeting, let's put it on here.
Yes, +1, that'd be awesome. Should we maybe post about this in Slack to try to get folks' attention, and then if someone thinks of something they want to present, or even if we have more than one suggestion, we can always fund them ahead of time for the next calls.
Sounds good. I'll do that.
David, you have something?
Not sure if anybody would be interested in seeing some WebAssembly run on Cluster API.
Mic drop, David.
Are you going to use CAPZ or Kappa? What's your provider of choice, David?
Well, clearly CAPZ. I mean,
yeah, that would be super cool. Let's maybe start a Slack thread about it, and then we can coordinate like who's going to do what demo when, depending on folks' availability. I think next call will also fall right in the middle of KubeCon or right before. So that might impact, some availability for people. Jack?
When was the last time running tests locally was demoed? Because that's extremely powerful and really annoying if you don't know how to do it.
So James actually did a really great walkthrough on CAPZ end-to-end tests, I believe, a month ago? Like,
oh, okay, that's very
not that long
cool.
ago, but he had a lot to say. There was a lot to cover for end-to-end test, and I think he ended up, running out of time, and so we had said this was going to be part 1, and we were going to do part 2 some other time. So yeah, we should follow up on that if either you or James wants to do a part 2 to cover what wasn't already covered. That would be very, very valuable. I think that was like extremely valuable. A lot of us, like, we all learned some tips and tricks about how James was compiling end-to-end code and everything. So really useful. I can send you the recording if you're interested.
Yeah, I think that I would love to see if there's anything that I would like. The things that I would want to demo are the very basics. So if those have already been demoed, then I think we should just work with James and see if we can get a part 2. If not, I would be happy to go through like a 10-minute demo to just the persona I'm thinking of is the PR submitter running into tests, and how do I iterate? How do I fix those tests?
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Matt, for bringing this up. Let's get some more demos in here, or more walkthroughs. They're super valuable. Cool. All right. I think let's skip to Zane first. I wanted to talk about the release, but we can pair that with the milestone at the end. So Zane, if you want to talk to us about API defaults, go for it.
Yeah, like, I don't know if this is the right platform for talking about this, but like, as we are adding support for AKS API, like I have seen few use cases that like one PR that is already open of spot versus regular instances. So AKS API is like treating the absent values as defaults, but like if we set the same default value for those, it will return some errors, right? Let's say like I've set the empty for the instance type, and it is actually a regular like instance type. And when I want to set it to a regular one, it will say, no, I cannot change that, right? So I think like this is probably like something that if we can push like AKS team to fix, it will like greatly increase the user experience, and we won't have breaking changes on the CAPC or any other actually like operator that is running on top of AKS. And this is coming from like, as we are adding support, like we want to add definitely for the public APIs, public IPs, and other features that AKS API is providing. If we don't add the default there, we are always on like depend on the time when we run the CAPC, it will behave differently if AKS defaults are changing, right? So I wanted to know like what are the thoughts here, if this would be right platform to ask AKS, or if it is not up to us to ask AKS to. Yeah, Jack.
Thank you very much for bringing this up. This is concerning. Can you give a few examples of property defaults that?
Yeah, I will add that. This is like, for example, one is the one we run into is like the instance type, if it is regular or spot, right? So let's say like if I have created all the machine types with not specifying anything, now we are adding the default that is regular, even though in reality they are regular. Like CAPC will return a lot of errors because AKS API is returning errors that you cannot change from empty to regular, when in reality they are regular, right?
Is this a CAPC solution or an AKS solution?
I think we could like not care like from our side and just reflect what the AKS API is doing that. But I think like this will give slightly bad user experience from the CAPC.
I 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. I wonder if there's a way where we can iterate forward the way that we, like perhaps we grab the resource first of all and compare any existing values that AKS knows about, and then we remove our default. I mean, maybe this sounds hairy now that I'm describing it, but I just imagine that changing this on the AKS side will be very non-trivial. It sounds like there's some sort of fundamental assumption that it sounds like there are essentially two representations of state. AKS's representation of state as expressed when the cluster was created, and then the sort of internal fully exploded representation of state, and it expects all client originating calls to match that original representation. Go ahead, David.
The other thing is some of these defaults may actually change as well. So it is possible that the AKS resource provider could, in fact, change that default at some point in the future. So if somebody's putting in empty, it could very well not be regular in the future and maybe spot or something like that. That's a little bit more dangerous in my opinion. So I think we have two options there. One, we specify a strong default opinion, and we add that default instead of just empty and let the provider figure it out. Or on create, we leave it empty and then we repopulate it back into the resource and store that resource again, causing another reconcile. But at that point, the reconcile should be consistent with AKS and not actually do another update. It's kind of tricky, but we could do something like that.
The problem with the first approach is that we would have to cover the full set of AKS feature capabilities, which we really can't because they're rolling out continually. They tend to be different from subscription to subscription, from region to region. And so until we cover that full set of capabilities, we are sort of just by design inheriting dozens and dozens of AKS defaults because the Azure managed cluster implementation just doesn't know anything about feature X, feature Y, feature Z. So we're getting feature X at this particular configuration because we didn't specify it. Zane, do you have any further thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think like yeah, I agree. I think the whole issue is like the stability of the CAPC as a project, right? Like, so if in the future, if we want to add some features and we are doing some breaking changes that you created some instance types, let's say in the past, now those same definitions are not valid because you know, like we cannot upgrade from there to the next one. So this is more about like the which strategy we want to like dig deeper from here, and also like agree on, we know this is a shortcoming from AKS API, and this is something that we won't add the defaults, and we knowingly take this decision that if we don't add the default, like as we said, like the API will behave differently depending on the AKS defaults. And the other is like, yeah, like if we bring back the AKS API from like what David was saying, as for today, it is returning empty, right? So even if we are like trying to bring that regular back to our thing, it is something that is like in the UI, I can see this is regular, but if I query the API, it is telling me it is empty. And that is actually the error, right? So because when I'm trying to change from empty to regular. So I don't know if we could go down that path. From my perspective, it's just like, if we can try like discussing how hard this would be change on AKS side, and just assume it, okay, this is something that we cannot drive that change. So let's assume we will go without defaults on certain features.
I can happily have a takeaway item to reach out to AKS, the AKS folks, and then make sure that we define the issue and any work to address it in the open. I know AKS is a public GitHub issue queue, so I think we should. I'll chat with them. You know, I work in Azure, so it's easier for me to get in touch with them, but I'll make sure that any concrete discussion happens in the open. But yeah, I agree with that, the way that you put it, Zane. Ultimately, this seems like an API pathology where we're getting an error of type, you can't change, like you can't change this property when we're not actually changing the property. So yeah.
Thank you.
Issue in the issue in the AKS repo sounds like a good way to get some attention on it. Cool. All right. Let's move on unless there are any other questions or comments on this one. Okay. So I just wanted to briefly talk about the release. I think we're due for another minor release at this point if we're trying to follow the same 2-month approximate cadence that we had set before. That being said, there are some discussions in the Cluster API office hours yesterday about defining a more formal release cadence for Cluster API and what that should be and what the support should be for those existing releases. Right, so I can link the issue later, but there is an issue discussing this proposal, and right now what's being discussed is having 3 releases a year. That isn't decided or anything yet. I guess my question for this group is, what do we want to have a release cadence for CAPZ as well? Do we want to align with CAPI? Do we want to do our own releases? I think we've been trying to release a bit more often than CAPI in general, and we could continue doing that. I don't know if we want to have a formal release cadence with announcing the date of the releases ahead of time, or if it's just more like, it hasn't been a while, let's do a release kind of thing. That's what we've been doing so far. So should we formalize that a little bit, or should we keep doing what we've been doing? Any thoughts or questions on that? Jack, go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot today. I have an opinion that favors more regular releases, which deviates from that plan. So in that sense, I feel like our ability to push out changes to the CAPTCHA user community would be constrained if we only released according to a very formal sort of every 4 months pattern. And maybe you could argue that ideally all the providers and CAPI itself would follow a common release cadence so that the various provider communities, when waiting for a CAPI bug, would not have to sort of realign their expectations compared to their provider release cadences. And like, so a CAPC user might fix a bug and then expect that in a couple of weeks they would be able to use that. And it might be disappointing to realize that if they fix a CAPI bug, it might be 2 or 3 months before they can actually realize. So that's not ideal, but I do think that if we feel like we can actually maintain at a high quality a release every 2 or 3 weeks, or essentially as needed, I think that would give more value to the CAPC user community.
For
Those are my
bugs,
thoughts.
thanks. Yeah, thank you. So for bugs specifically, like you mentioned, this wouldn't necessarily apply because we can, release patch releases in between release cycles to release those bugs or bug fixes. So the bug fixes can be backported to the current minor release, and we release those as needed, especially if there's an bug that's impacting a user, several users. We try to get that out as soon as possible.
And that also CAPI follows a similar pattern.
CAPI also follows this pattern. So this is more like for features, like the bigger releases that include, cutting the release at main. But yeah.
Right, that's a good clarification. Does anybody else have anything to say? Okay. Oh, Matt does. Great.
Matt, go for it.
Just, you won't be surprised, I'm in violent agreement with Jack that the more frequently we can do releases. So, but I guess from the point of view, the more frequently we can do them, I think the better overall. So I guess from the point of view of this question, that means, that suggests maybe we should at least match CAPC's release cadence, if not do more.
Sounds good.
So yeah, I think that to answer to speak to features, I would take a practical approach. And right now, practically speaking, CAPC has a lot of features. The AKS stuff is a perfect example where all of these things that folks like Zane and myself are pushing into the AKS space, those definitely qualify as features. And I feel like my experience interacting with you, Zane, and other folks is that the ability to pick up those features as soon as possible is pretty valuable. So I think it really is, can we support an additional release velocity? Can we push out releases every month or something and do that effectively? And if we can, what's the downside of deviating from CAPI?
I think the only downside is more user expectation and like the fact that it's different and it's inconsistent. But other than that, technically there's nothing that ties us to CAPI's releases. And Kappa is already doing more releases than CAPI, and so is CAPZ a little bit. We've already done 3 minor releases in 1.0, so we're at 1.3 now. Whereas like CAPI hasn't released 1.2 yet. So we're already going faster. I think, we would at least release as often as CAPI. The question is more like how much more often and how formal should it be? Like, should we agree on a date ahead of time? What we've been doing so far is using milestones. Actually, let me open the milestone so we can review it. But we've been, kind of trying to plan what we're prioritizing for the upcoming release in the milestone, and then putting a tentative date for that release, which we haven't always followed. Like currently, I think we're due for a release for the next one. So we're at 1.3 right now. And so like, I think we were maybe a bit too ambitious for 1.3 in terms of what we could do if we were going to try to do it within a month or two, but this is what we have. And all this stuff is being worked on actively pretty much. So it's all in progress, and we've done a lot of what we said we would already. So most of it is done. I think realistically, we can't drive release timelines by feature and by date. It's like one or the other. Either we have to, wait for this to be 100% complete and that's when we release, or we put a due date and that's when we release. But even if it's not complete, but if we try to do both, then it's not going to work. So I'm personally more, on the side of like, let's do a due date and say like, this release is going to be 2 months from now. And then we try to approximate what we think we can get done, or what's priority for that release. But that doesn't mean it's a commitment to get everything done. And yeah, Tilo, go ahead.
Yeah, I recall a similar discussion yesterday in the CAPI meeting, and I fully agree. So I'm coming from the operating system releases side of things. We have a Linux distro, and just having a static constant release cycle. In our case, it's even every 2 weeks. But then we have the tests fully automated, more or less. So we just need to issue the release and do the release dance. It really helps getting at least some of the stuff that is already out, not waiting for anything else. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, agreed. And also we have continuous integration, so that also helps. Like it's not like we have to do a bunch of testing for 2 weeks before we feel confident about getting a release out. Given that if we keep our test signal healthy, which is another whole other story, but we have to work on that. Okay, so maybe I'll start a Slack and thread just to be inclusive and make sure that others can have a say in this. But I'm thinking maybe we can, try to follow either once a month or every 2 month cadence to try it out. We've been doing approximately every 2 months, a bit more than that, but I think more than once a month might be a bit too much, just in terms of like what we can get done in 2 weeks. But and then we can just like try to do more frequent releases. The other question is, how many miners do we backport to when there's a bug?
Thanks for bringing that up. That's a definite thing where we need to draw the line. So maybe we need to poll the community. Like if we start doing monthly releases, which I think would be great, how disruptive is it that the community is going to have to keep their CAPC bits up to date at a minimum every 3 months? Does anybody have any thoughts on the current meeting about how painful that is to, if you're running 1.1 and we cut 1.4, you're gonna have to update, I think, at least to 1.2 or something, according to the current contract, to make sure that all of your clusters are going to be able to get fixes. How disruptive is that?
Any users on the call have opinions on that? Zane?
Cool. I'll go ahead, Zane.
I think I was going to say, like, from our side, we are just waiting actually to be released. Like with the current cadence, like it's not like we are just staying with the old version of CAPC. So I cannot speak from the user side, like where we are staying with 1.3 versions behind. But I could believe like this might change if there's like more frequent releases. But as far the experience has been like not really painful, I have to say.
There's a little bit of a test gap there. So we might want to set some scenarios up where we upgrade a V1 Alpha 4 cluster to 1.3 or something and verify we have function. It'd be nice to know in advance if we've broken the upgrade contract in some way.
We do have an API upgrades test that updates CAPZ versions in CAPI, but I think we have v1 beta 1 to main. So that would test like the latest release to the current main branch.
Yeah, that's great that we have that test. So it should be easy if you know, it's doable to explode that matrix a little bit. Maybe it's not doable, but.
Okay, cool. In terms of the current release, last release we had, I believe, was February, so it's been over 2 months. So I think we're due for a 1.3 really soon. How do we feel about doing that this week or next, or probably early next week? Yeah, it's been exactly 2 months. Any, I know there are a few bugs around the managed identities with pod identity that we were looking to fix. I was working on one, Matt was working on the other. That would be great to get that in there, but I don't think we should wait for specific PRs. We can always get that into a backport if it doesn't make it. Matt?
Yeah, I think we should go ahead and do a release. Also, my fix is really mergeable now. I'm just kind of flailing around with the test, but if we want to get that in before next week, I think we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I think mine is also ready. It's just waiting for review. So we could try to get those in and do 1.3. Okay, cool. So I'll start the discussion in Slack, and then we can try to do a once a month maybe, or once every 2 months release. Great. Let's see. Any other general questions that anyone has about CAPZ, about tests, about the repo? Anything that anyone else wants to discuss? Ashutosh?
No, just a general question, like, is anybody attending KubeCon? Because I'm planning to, and I'm really excited to meet you all. So.
Looks like Tilo is going. It's closer to you too, Tilo, right?
Yeah, are you still in Berlin, Tilo?
Yeah. So it's definitely, it's not really next door, but yeah, it's a bit closer.
Yeah, it doesn't look like anyone else is going, from at least from this chat, but there might be, others going, just not in the call. Cool. If not, we should do an in-person meetup at some point. That'd be fun. Cool. Anything else? Any other questions or anything anyone wants to say? If not, well, hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks all for coming and for the great discussions. We always start with no agenda and then we end up having all these really interesting discussions. But thank you, Matt, for taking all the notes. It's super useful. And have a great day. See y'all later. Bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.